Hey everybody, I wanted to read aloud chapter 2 of the autobiography of DMX, famous rapper who passed away a few years back. It's called Earl. This is chapter 2. It's called Our Side of the World. In 1975, when I was 4 years old, my mother finally found a nice place of her own building in Building 80 of the School Street apartment complex. The project would soon become one of the most dangerous and neglected areas in all of Yonkers. But for us, coming from the cramped and lonely space of the Roker, moving to School Street was a definite step up. Building 80, like the rest of School Street, was all black and Hispanic. Yonkers was filled with white people, but you would never know it if you didn't go to their side of the world. There was only one white person in our building, and of course he was married to a black lady. He was the maintenance man, responsible for everything from our heat and hot water, which was often too cold, to the elevators always broken and the stairways that were covered in piss, broken glass, and tobacco spit. An all black and Hispanic building having to call a white person to get any kind of service was fucked up. But that's just how things were in the hood. The bugged out thing about Yonkers, New York, though, was that the ghetto was in the best area of the city. Living in buildings that sit on or close to the waterfront, directly across from the New Jersey Palisades, most of the poor folks in YO had a much better view across the Hudson River than the rich people in Yonkers did that lived mostly further to the east. I didn't know how that happened, but life for us was still crazy. There were 6 sets of projects on this side of Yonkers, and they were all different. School Street and Skull Bomb houses were your typical high-rise units. Then there were the more country-looking low-rise projects like Mulford Gardens and Cottage. The better-kept buildings of Ravine stretched a long way and didn't feel like projects because of their unobstructed view of the river. And while Walberton Avenue, where my grandmother ended up, was not one specific place, the part of the block that led all the way down to South Broadway was considered its own hood. And there weren't just black hoods to deal with. In Yonkers, you could find Puerto Rican hoods, Mexican hoods, Arabic hoods, and even Italian hoods. In the middle of that mess was Getty Square, the only downtown area Yonkers had, which until about midnight, when things got grimier, was filled with the normal hustle and bustle of any big shopping area. I've always thought there was a black cloud over Yonkers, a big curse that attached itself to anyone who grew up there, because somehow any ghetto I've seen anywhere in the world reminds me of a place in YO. Anytime I travel, I always go looking for a feel for the community, a sense of the people, and I end up saying, oh, this looks like Mulford, or this reminds me of Ravine. And even though Yonkers is one of the biggest cities in New York State, growing up, everybody knew everybody. There were a lot of big families with even bigger extended families, and we were all interconnected. Nothing could go down on one side of town without someone knowing about it on the other before the day was out. It was the same in the house. My favorite thing about living in School Street was that I could hear everything that was going on in the neighbors' apartments. There were 10 families to a floor, and because of how all the heat and hot water systems were connected, it was hard for anyone to keep their business to themselves. A girl named Yetta lived below me on the 10th floor. I could hear her getting her ass whipped all the time. I'd be chilling in my bedroom, and then out of the blue I'd hear, I told you, coming through the pipes as loud as it was if it was happening in my room. It was the funniest thing in the world. Mothers tend to repeat themselves a lot when they're whipping ass. Didn't I say? Didn't I say? Didn't I say? They scream without ever completing the sentence. Well, what the fuck did you say, lady? But when I teased Yetta about it the next morning, her and her friends would always remind me, oh mama, no. Cries they heard when I was getting it. Yeah, bet you got fucked up last night too, they'd tell me. The apartment was my mom's first real place of her own, the first place she really cared about living in. And once we were there, she began the slow process of getting herself all public assistance to try to build a better life. The first thing she did was get a new couch. It was so much more comfortable than the ugly maroon futon we had to sit up in the Roker. It was a big green fluffy thing, and whenever She had a camera. She always told me to sit on it so she could take a picture. Breakfast was my favorite meal at home, and I used to love pancakes, especially when my mother cut them up in even squares for me. I liked them so much I didn't even mind when she put corn in the batter so that they'd be extra filling and hold us down until dinner. I tried to make them myself too, but my mother said I never cooked them all the way through. If she didn't let me make pancakes, sometimes she would give me money to go to the store to buy honey buns instead. I would heat them up in the oven and serve them with butter. First, we would say grace. Then my sister and I would climb in the bed with her and we'd all eat together. My mother always loved it when I got up to make her some tea. Baby, fix me a cup of tea, I say in this high-pitched voice, imitating Eddie Murphy's delirious routine. She'd laugh. It was like the best of times. Even though I had my own room in School Street, it never really felt like that because somehow I'd always end up having to sleep on the floor in the living room. That was mostly because of my mother's younger brother, Robert. Uncle Pinky, we called him, and he was a smooth brother when he was young. He was the only one in the family I remember who ever had a car. It was a metallic blue Cadillac Coupe de Ville, and one time he took me for a ride downtown in it. But he was never a hustler. In the early 70s, hustling wasn't big money, and Pinky was more the fixing type anyway. He liked to work on cars or stoves or TVs. Anything you needed done, Pinky could do it. He was the local handyman. It was hard work, but it always kept a few dollars in his pocket, and my uncle stayed with the job. But if he always had a job, then the other thing he always had was a new baby mother. Uncle Pinky was always bringing women around my mother's house. Hey, Earl, I want you to meet my new lady. My old lady, he'd say before asking my mom if him and his girl could stay for a few days. First, I would have to meet the girl. Then I'd have to meet all my new cousins. There was little Robert, then little Robert. I have a cousin named Damien. None of his chicks ever agreed to sleep on the couch, though, and that's how they ended up in my bedroom, and I ended up on the living room floor. For a time, I didn't give a fuck. It was more like an adventure. Yeah, now I got the run of the house all night. The kitchen was right off the living room, and with new people in the house, I could eat what I wanted and blame it on them. I just had to make sure everyone saw me go to the fridge before they went to sleep. I'm so full, Mama. I think I'm just going to go to bed. I would announce real loud. In the morning when my mother noticed that the last 2 slices of bread were gone, then I hit her with, I didn't do it. Mama, because you remember I was full when I went to bed. Right. If my face was serious, though, I would get away with it, thinking about that extra cheese sandwich I had in the bottom of my stomach. But when Pinky's few days turned into a month and I was still on the living room floor, then it got annoying when I had to deal with the mice and the roaches. I didn't mind the roaches. I really didn't. They would walk on you, but I just normally keep going because they were always boogieing me somewhere. And if you realize one was on you, you would just knock him off like it was nothing. Roaches never really mean to fuck with you. Occasionally you get a stupid one that would stay around, and that's probably because you had some crumbs in the blanket or something and he was hungry. But mice always like to run around you, and they made a lot of fucking noise. I would never get to sleep with them about. Sometimes during those nights on the floor, I actually saw roaches that were as big as mice. They were dark brown and had wings. They bit too, but their bites didn't itch, so I didn't care. If you bite me and I itch, you're a pain in the ass. If you bite me and I don't itch, what the hell? Forget about it. People often said Uncle Pinky and me looked alike, and as a kid, I really admired him. It didn't hurt his image with me that he was always getting pussy, constantly fucking in my room. There was no lock on my bedroom door, so in the morning I'd walk in there and see him and his girl laid up, legs hanging all out crazy. Oh, you guys were doing something. I just couldn't figure out why the room smelled like cornflakes, soggy cornflakes. When you leave your bowl on the table for like 3 hours and the flakes get all stuck to the sides, that's what pussy used to smell like to me. I know what you guys are doing. I can remember thinking when I caught him in the room for the 3rd time. That's the soggy cornflake thing. Needless to say, it didn't take long for me to be right up under him. I wanted to do everything he did, go everywhere he went. There was a problem, though, a major problem. My mother would never let my sister or me go outside. It was one of her rules when we moved to School Street. She said that because we lived up so high, if something went down while we were playing outside, it would take her too long to get down to see what was going on. So we had to stay in the house all afternoon. Even though Bonita was 2 years older than I was, it didn't matter. Unless we were running an errand or going to the store, neither of us was ever allowed to leave the apartment. That made me so mad because they had built a new park around the corner from our building, and I couldn't even go to it. But all the other kids were there. The only way my sister and I could go was if my mother took us herself, and that didn't happen very often. So first, I would just constantly joke and run around inside the house or try to play games with anyone who came over. But I didn't get away with that for too long. What are you doing, Earl? Stop that. Go sit down somewhere. Realizing I had to find ways to entertain myself, then I started playing with those little green plastic army men all the time. I would line them up and then fight each other in imaginary wars. Then I took it further. I figured if I got one of those thin, clear plastic bags from the supermarket that they use for fruit and tied the handles together with string, I could make a parachute for them. Being 11 floors up, if I dropped the little guy out the window and got enough air under the bag, he would float like a charm. With practice, I found that it worked better if you cut the plastic bag in half before you tied it to him. I was so into it, one time I spent a whole week making paratroopers and paper airplanes. Then I matched them up and sent the whole squadron out of the window one by one. That was fun. But toy cars were my favorite. I could play with them for hours. It didn't matter if they were small Matchbox collectibles or the larger ones that you could put your foot in and push around. School streets' hallways were pretty slippery, and I always ended up busting my ass in those. And I especially loved anything that had a remote control. I had this one remote control pickup truck that I figured out a way to fasten other model cars to, and it would still run. I remember I attached a Dukes of Hazzard General Lee body to it, and it sat it right on the top. It looked so hot. I loved that pickup truck because the steering wheel would actually turn, and I could maneuver it all around the house. Sometimes Peaky would leave one of his women alone for a minute and play with me and my cars. That was cool, until of course my mother would say it was getting too late to play over other people's heads. Sometimes he'd try to argue with his sister, telling her it was only 6 o'clock and still light outside, but it rarely worked. Our game was over. The fact that Pinky stuck up for me added to the love that I felt for him. He was probably the only man around I had any respect for, but no matter what he did, he would never be my father. The only time I saw my father was when he took me to New York with him to sell his paintings. See, my pops was an artist. He painted watercolors of street scenes and sold them at local fairs or malls. Art was his passion, and he spent his entire life working on it. He was so committed to his craft that even during the times he wasn't making any money, he always refused to do anything else. One time, studying getting another job, my father chose to go homeless and live in Central Park for a few weeks before he refused to do anything else besides paint. That was just what he loved to do. When he went downtown, I remember there was always a whole line of people up against the black gate. Each of them had different blankets set up on the sidewalk where they would sell their books or toys or different kinds of gadgets. It was always a warm day too, most likely spring or summertime. And I remember always eating a bag of fresh roasted peanuts, probably because that was all he could afford to get me to eat. When we got there, my father would introduce me to his friends like, yeah, this is my boy. I really enjoyed it because the people would actually seem happy to meet me. Oh, wow, man, they would say, and then shake my hand and smile. I felt glad that I was part of something. It was different than what I was used to at home. It was like the real world, the part of the world I never got to see, and I never wanted to leave. Being with my father was what got me started drawing. By the time I was 6, the walls of my room were covered with pictures I had made. I used to look at the characters in Mad Magazine and just copy them into my notebook. I used pencil or this set of colored drawing pens that my Aunt Vern had given me. I never used tracing paper. If I was going to do it, I had to do it for real. I really got good with faces, and my sister used to always ask me to draw her. She would just sit across from me in the living room, and I would get busy. When I got older, I started doing more stuff. One time I made this stencil of a woman's profile out of wood. I gave her earrings shaped like the African continent and this red, black, and green scarf. The scarf was checkered, and it took me forever to fill it all in because you had to burn the design into the wood before you painted it. I think I only went downtown twice with my father, but those trips really meant a lot to me. He was my father, and even though I didn't know him, I liked spending that time with him. He was good for just popping up out of the blue, though. One time he arrived at the door to our apartment in School Street and told my mother that he was there there to walk me to school. That was my first day of kindergarten, September 1976. So that was chapter 2 of the Autobiography of DMX. This was told to Smokey D. Fontaine. The book is called Earl, so that's what it looks like. If you guys like this, please don't forget to like, subscribe, message. Share the video too. Peace.